Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I wanted to say big thank you that the Vail Symposium has this wonderful topic on Ukraine. In current uncertain times, it's very important for every Ukrainian that is fighting at this particular moment on the front line in Ukraine. As you know, Ukrainians are shelled every day. Like right before our talk, I just checked, and Odessa, unfortunately, was shelled with drones, and the critical infrastructure was shelled, and the residential building. So this is the current reality of all the Ukrainians, but I'm very grateful to the Vail community and the Vail Symposium for keeping Ukraine in your focus. It's very important for all of us. Just a little bit about myself. I'm an ordinary person from Ukraine. I was born in Crimea. When I was 7, I started learning English language, but still, my apologies for my Eastern European accent. It will always be with me. When I was 16, I first saw the United States of America. I was on the Transatlantic Fellowship Leadership Program in North Carolina, Wake Forest University. Then I went back to Ukraine. I spent, more than probably 15 years in journalism. I worked in Kharkiv, it's the eastern part of Ukraine, and then in Kiev for the television stations. And being from Crimea, you have to be resilient because something is going on all the time. At first, Russia invades and then illegally annexes it, and then you just hope to build your life on the mainland of Ukraine, and then boom, the 24th of February 2022, and the Ukraine is invaded again. So I was the person second time because it's going to be suicide for them. I was the person who would be telling, no, they're not going to do it. We need to regain control over Crimea by diplomatic means because Ukraine is the smaller country. We can't fight with the bigger Russia and all of that. But I was wrong. I was wrong all these years before the full-scale invasion because simply it doesn't work. And I will be telling you today about the life in temporarily occupied territories. These are Russian-controlled territories. This is the official term by the Ukrainian government, temporarily occupied territories. And I encourage you to have your questions. If you want to stop me any time during the presentation, please do it. Raise your hand and I will take your question because I have a lot of information and I understand that probably I won't be able to tell about everything, and I want you to learn something and I want you to have an opportunity to ask the question. So that is why my today's focus is temporarily occupied territories, because this is what I do at the Center for European Policy Analysis. I research and write about temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories and about everyday lives of Ukrainians there. So as you know, since 2014, today is 1,107th day of the full-scale invasion, and I think it's great that Ukrainians are standing, that Ukrainians are hoping to fight and repel the Russian soldiers from the sovereign territory of Ukraine. In 2014, Crimea and part of Lugansk Oblast and part of Donetsk Oblast had hostilities. That is why Crimea was annexed. And then since 2022, we have part of Kherson Oblast and part of Zaporizhia Oblast that are temporarily occupied. The interesting fact is that in 2022, in October, when I came to DC, to Washington, DC, on a fellowship for the Center for European Policy Analysis, my friends in Ukraine would have a joke. They would be telling me, Elina, Ukrainian armed forces are liberating the land. Look, they have all the means. They have liberated Kiev region, Kharkiv region. They have liberated the part of the Kherson Oblast. You won't have anything to write about. And I told them I would come back. If this is the case, I would be happy to come back to Ukraine and be there. But unfortunately, as we see 1,107 days and still Ukrainians are fighting, we're fighting for our freedom. And everyone who is even on the territories which are temporarily occupied, you see this, the red territory, they hope that Ukrainian armed forces will liberate these lands too. And to me, sometimes when I hear stories from people who have been living under occupation for 11 years, and they still tell me, Elina, when the Ukrainian armed forces will liberate us, I think these are the bravest people in the world, because regardless the fact that they've been under occupation for so many years, and many of them, I will tell you something, don't speak Ukrainian right now. It's the younger generation, for instance, people who were born after the annexation of Crimea or when hostilities began in Lugansk and Donetsk, they unfortunately don't speak Ukrainian. But they still feel themselves as Ukrainian, and they want Ukraine to liberate these lands. So, okay, I'm not really well versed with it, but hopefully I will do it. Okay. Sorry, do you also see it? It's stuck. Interesting. All right. All right. No, it's not. So, as you know, well, right now we have about 27% of Ukraine is under occupation. This is according to the President Vladimir Zelensky. There are other assessments by CNN, for instance. They say that it's around 18% of the Ukrainian land is occupied, meaning it's under the Russian control. The war, unfortunately, has caused significant displacement. We have around 5 million Ukrainians who are internally displaced. So, as I'm from Crimea, I'm considered to be a internally displaced person. So, I have a Crimean registration, but I live on the mainland of Ukraine, which means I moved internally on the mainland of Ukraine. So these people are called internally displaced people. Right now we have around 5 million displaced people, and around 7.5 million people live abroad. So this is actually the picture that I took in March 2022 when I took the evacuation train that went to the western border of Ukraine. So after a week, I understood that Russians are not going to stop. They are still invading. They are still attacking us with all types of missiles. And the only place in my apartment was the bathroom, because you have to have two walls rules. So this is when you have to have two walls and you don't have to have any windows. Then you are considered to be relatively safe, because there is no safe place right now in Ukraine if you border Russia. So then this is what I saw on the train station. All these people that are standing there, it's mainly children and their moms and mothers who want to take the evacuation train that would take them to the western border of Ukraine. This picture, I just thought that this cat was very scared of everything that was going on, and he was without the cage, but his owner still took him with him. So I just wanted to share what was the vibe. This is a very nice word in Ukraine in March 2022, when people tried to evacuate to safer places. Unfortunately, if you live in Ukraine, if you stayed on the temporarily occupied territories, you stayed there in the Russian-controlled area. And not all people who are staying in the temporarily occupied territories are considered to be like not patriots or not Ukrainians. It's just in many cases, people have their sick parents, they have businesses, they have their houses that they have been building for many years. They just cannot simply, leave it, and they explain sometimes in Russian, sometimes in Ukrainian, look, I built this house and I want to die here. This is what people in their 50s, 60s would tell to many evacuation groups that come over to Pokrovsk or come over to any region in Lugansk, Donetsk Oblast even today, and they don't want to evacuate. And this is unfortunately the reality. So right now, around 6 million Ukrainians live in Russian-controlled territories. So including 1.5 million teenagers and kids. And this is a very important number. I will tell you why later. So if you live in the temporarily occupied territory, then unfortunately, you have to stay there and do whatever Russian forces ask you to do. So a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed a woman, and she just told me her like case, how she tried to take her son that stayed in the Russian-controlled territory of Yenichisk in Kherson region. So when the war began, the full-scale invasion began, she couldn't pick him up in the village, so he stayed with her parents. And then in several months, she tried, because there were hostilities already, there was a front line. So she tried to go back there, but from the other side, like from the European side. But she told that they held me for 2.5 days. This is the Russian border guards, forced me to take a polygraph and asked about weapons, drugs, whether the territory was occupied or liberated, how I felt about their special operation, and about the Azov battalion. Unfortunately, she couldn't take her son that time. It was in 2023. So they basically told her, we cannot let you in the temporarily occupied territory because like you might be spying for the Ukrainian armed forces. Who knows why they decided so, but she told that she's an ordinary person. She didn't have anyone. She had some friends in the armed forces of Ukraine, but look, this is the current reality. Everyone has a friend in the armed forces of Ukraine because everyone is fighting right now, and like all our male population is at the front line or in the critical infrastructure or working to serve for the. This is how it is, and they didn't let her in. So in 1 month, she had to make the documents so that her mom could take her son and bring it to her to Poland, where she resides right now. So this is unfortunately the current situation. When I asked her, do you want this territory to be controlled by Ukraine? She said, you know what? I want to like see my parents. I want to see my people there, and I don't want to be labeled as a spy, or I don't want to be labeled as someone who is spying or who is an agent or whatever. Like I'm an ordinary person from Ukraine, from this territory, and they don't let me in. So unfortunately, this is what it is. And filtration, so I just called it, it's unfortunately, this is the procedure. So if you try to enter the temporarily occupied territory, or if you try to exit it, you have to go through the so-called filtration operation, where usually FSB employers are interrogating you, and ask you to show your phone, whether you have any pictures. They can check your social media, whether you support or not support the Ukrainian armed forces, or if you have someone serving in the Ukrainian armed forces. So in a way, if you have someone, then you're just stuck because you can't get out and you can't get in, because then it will be the subject for your detention, for your potential detention in the future. And this is the I wouldn't even like say that once I will be standing here in Vail, Colorado, and talking about filtration operation being held in the temporarily occupied territory. But filtration is actually the method how Russians are stealing Ukrainian kids, because during these filtration procedures, sometimes parents and their kids are divided, because parents cannot go to the temporarily occupied territory or to the Ukraine-controlled territory, depending where the checkpoint is. So in this case, the parent might be even detained, and the kid might appear in the, like foster home or whatever. So there are like 4 other ways. You probably heard about the story that, Russians are abducting a lot of Ukrainian children. And you might be surprised how it is possible, because they explain it that allegedly they are trying to save kids. If you read the stories, you will understand how difficult it is for parents, for grandparents or relatives to actually return this kid to Ukraine. And this is just data that I'm showing to you, but usually 4 other methods how Ukrainian kids were abducted is through from hospitals on the temporarily occupied territories. So when hostilities began, a lot of kids were taken to the Russian-controlled territories or to Russia. Then it's orphanages or boarding schools, the same situation. So Russian forces visited orphanages, boarding schools, and family homes to take those children. And sometimes it was recreation camps. If parents live in the temporarily occupied territories, their kids might be sent to Crimea for like recreation. They simply explain it, look, your kid needs some recreation, some vacation, we can take him or her to Crimea. And then it's very difficult to bring back this kid. I spoke with a few organizations who are trying to return those kids, and they explained that it's a lottery, always. And I thought that it's fascinating how these schemes work in terms of even returning kids. I was explained that there are cases when the Russians say, no, we will not give the child to the parents. It's dangerous in Ukraine, and we have decided the child will stay here. If you want to be with the child, get Russian citizenship and stay in Russia. Or another challenge for parents, sometimes they don't even know where their kids are. Russia is doing everything to hide them. You would be surprised. How is it possible? We live in the 21st century. It's not possible. It's false. It's not true. But it's interesting because whenever they get this child, they give them the Russian citizenship, and they were facts. They are in Google, everywhere. You can read them. How they change the kid's name, and then when parents or relatives try to reach out to the Russian side, explaining we're looking for this person with this first and last name, this first and last name have already been changed, and unfortunately, they cannot find this child. But I'm sure you heard about this situation. You would probably ask, how is it possible in the 21st century? Why these territories are so closed? Because there are people who are following the Russian rule, who are doing everything so that kids will never return home, or these territories were like black boxes. And these are currently Russian-appointed governments of these temporarily occupied territories. So what they do, they just basically follow all the rules that Russians are telling them to follow. On October 5th, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed laws on the accession of 4 partially occupied Ukrainian regions, Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson Oblast, into Russia. And those people, with 2 who are governors of Crimea and Sevastopol, are basically following everything that they are said and forced to follow. So if people stay in the temporarily occupied territories, and we are talking about approximately 6 million people right now, because Ukrainians don't have access to these territories, and the world doesn't have the access to these territories. So there are, I will tell you shortly, briefly about this processes that take place there. It's Russification. So it's forced passportization. People are basically told to take the Russian passport. And Russian forces want to impose the forced passportization in order to say, hey, it's not Ukrainians, it's Russian citizens living on these territories. This is why they want Ukrainians to take Russian passports. We don't have the number, how many people obtained the Russian passports, but the Ukrainian government explained that if this is the survival for this particular family or person, they need to take this Russian passport. It's not considered to be like a violation. Then when Ukraine regains control over this territory, it won't be considered to be a passport. It will be just like a fake document that helped this person to survive through the occupation. And I think that this is the right decision to do, because many people just forced to do it. So what are the schemes, how Russians are given these passports? So this is the Russian appointed governor of Zaporizhia Oblast, Baletsky, said in October 2023. We will take more measures to ensure that only citizens of the Russian Federation will live on our territory. If before the new year a person still receives medical coverage using a Ukrainian passport, then after New Year they will not. And this is true. I reached out, I have a series of articles behind the lines, SIPA. So I wrote about these cases, how Ukrainians are trying to set up the planned operation somewhere, and they cannot, because if they have the Ukrainian passport, then they simply cannot do it. In order to actually get an operation or any type of emergency, you need to have an insurance. But in order to have an insurance, like a special Russian insurance, but in order to have this insurance, you have to have a Russian passport. So this is unfortunately like a trap. We can't say that like Russians are standing with the weapon. It's allegedly voluntarily, but we all understand that it's almost like they are standing with a weapon near your head, because you can't live there if you don't have this passport. Then another scheme with properties, because it's basically people, their homes are theirs by going to local authorities with a Russian passport. If they have a Ukrainian passport, then they can't prove that this apartment, this house is theirs. So again, people are forced to take the Russian passport in order to say that, hello, this is my property. I've been saving all my life money to buy it, and now I can't have it, right? But this was a story. Katya, her name was changed. She lives in DC. She fled to the United States after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. She's from Novotroitsk. That's also the currently occupied Kherson region. And she was basically in a trap because her son was serving in the armed forces of Ukraine, so she couldn't stay in the temporarily occupied territory because for them she was very disloyal, of course. So that is why she took a decision to move to the United States as a part of the United for Ukraine program. And then she said in a year or in a year and a half, someone called her friends, and said, Katya, someone is living in your apartment. I asked who, and they said, we don't know, but the lights are always on, and they've moved their stuff in. And she even tried to talk with local collaborators about that. She was like, hey, I just can't go back there, but like, this is my property. Why did you just, why did you give this property to someone else? And they told her, you left. And she said, I didn't leave. I left because of the full-scale invasion. But for them, it didn't matter, you know? So if she was not there in this territory, she automatically lost her property. And unfortunately, all these local occupying authorities, they ask you to bring a passport and like papers on your accommodation or apartment or house in person. Because in this case, they need to see that someone allegedly lives. At first, she tried to find someone who would be living in her apartment, but it was not possible because then they changed the local laws. So this is a few schemes. And the last one, by the way, we called it the ethnic cleansing by home loan, because right now Russian banks offer 2% mortgage on the temporarily occupied territories. And this is valid only for those who are involved in the special military operation. So basically, if Russians are taking part in the war, then they can obtain this 2% cheap mortgage, because it's very cheap for Russia. Right now, I think in Russia it is 27 or 28%, like the average rate. And they are given 2% mortgages. And also, they are giving it to teachers, doctors, cultural workers, and state employers, including FSB, National Guard, and Ministry of Internal Affairs, because they lack specialists there. There are collaborators. We talk about that. Yes, there are Ukrainians who went and who started collaborating with the Russian occupying authorities because this was their choice. But we can't say what is the number. We can't tell the number. But like in mass, people don't want to collaborate, and they don't want to especially work as a cultural worker or teacher or doctor. But of course, we understand that there are many cases, and as Ukrainians say, when there will be this time, there will be justice, but we all understand that there are many people who didn't do anything bad, but they still had to live in this temporarily occupied territory, and apparently they worked somewhere during this occupation. So there is a clear link between passportization and mobilization. So when a person obtains a Russian passport, he or she has to register with the local enlistment office. So as they explain, it doesn't mean that you will be sent to the war, but many facts say that this is the basically preparation to send those people who registered in the enlistment offices in the war against Ukraine. And according to Ukraine's defense intelligence, 55,000 to 60,000 men have been forcibly mobilized in the occupied territories since the start of 2022. But that was the data as of July 2023. It's very hard to obtain any type of specific mobilization data or anything. So also there is the Russian authorities have been conducting raids to forcibly draft men from their homes and workplaces, including at factories like Donetsk Teplomerezha, Yanakievo metallurgical plant, Alchevsk metallurgical plant, and so on and so forth. Since 2024, about 7,000 people from the occupied territories have signed contracts with the Russian military, mainly due to high unemployment and tough living conditions. This is the data of the National Resistance Center. So in Melitopol, which was occupied in February 2022, Zaporizhia Oblast, the first military recruitment office appeared 8 months later. Their first task was to form the Sudoplatov Volunteer Battalion, named after a Soviet intelligence officer. These so-called volunteer battalions are designed to get as many people as possible to fight, often as a cannon fodder. They are creating different formats, like people's militias, to involve as many people as possible who can then be used as cannon fodder at the front. This is what Ukraine's governor of Zaporizhia Oblast, Fedorov, told me in the interview. So this is the situation. If you have any type of questions so far, please do let me know. We have around 8 slides left, and then we'll have our discussion. But the interesting question, how do people live there, and why do they comply, why do they agree to live in the world they are? Well, because the whole information space is closed for them. So when Russian forces come there, they try to create allegedly good life for those people who are in temporarily occupied territories. So they're trying to show that close the information field. So if you want to read anything like a Ukrainian website, you have to have a VPN. Many Ukrainian websites, or say American websites, this is very dangerous. It's not possible to even log in and read any type of information. Well, for that you also have to know the English language, but even like Ukrainian website, people say that if they don't have VPN, so you have to basically have a special device or like program on your laptop computer to actually be able to read the information. So, and in many cases, people say that they can't do it. So basically, the main thing isolating occupied territories from the outside world, militarizing education and altering the self-identification of Ukrainian youth. So the person that you're seeing on the top, this is Alexander Malkevich. He used to be in St. Petersburg, the head of the state channel, and then he was supposed to build all the local television in the temporarily occupied territories. So say Ukrainian stations that used to work in Kherson or Zaporizhia Oblast, they were substituted by the Russian television. And because they don't have specialists in many cases, they had to invent the new methods. So they have like schools for young journalists where they have to teach people who don't have anything with journalism how to report on news. But we all understand what type of news. It's a propaganda machine that is being built in the temporarily occupied territories. So they also say that all the kids and teenagers who go to the military organizations like UNARMIA, they are welcome to join the journalism organizations and television channels, because in a way they want to form the society there that will be supporting only the Russian regime, and because they don't have an opportunity to read normal news, or in many ways it's very hard to talk with people because they're afraid. Like Katya, the story of whom I told you, that someone lived in her apartment. She told me the story that she used to have some friends in her Novotroysk, and then once they would have FaceTime conversations with her friends from her village. And she used to have the Ukrainian flag on her background. And once they told her, Katya, can you please choose another background, because we are afraid that we will be detained because we are allegedly transmitting some information to you, and you are living in DC right now, so we don't know how we can communicate with you. So imagine how people are intimidated, people are humiliated. That's the main emotion if you live in the temporarily occupied territories. You're scared, you're humiliated, you don't know what's going on, you're afraid that tomorrow might never come to you. And if you talk with people from Ukraine or your former colleagues, friends, then you might be detained for just spying or transmitting information for the armed forces of Ukraine. So this is the current reality that is being built there. And we won't have time for, I won't have time to tell you more about militarization of education, how they make a lot of UNARMIA, for instance, those people in red. It's established in 2016 at the initiative of the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, and has been active in Crimea since 2016 and expanded into Donbass and other newly occupied territories after the full-scale invasion. So they are drawing from Soviet-era traditions. Vladimir Lenin All-Union Pioneer Organization and the Komsomol, UNARMIA is closely linked with the Russian Armed Forces and other government organizations. So the organization aims to foster loyalty to the Russian army among teenagers, and they do it in multiple ways. We won't have time for that, but I write about it, brainwashing of teenagers. You can read about very creative ways how they try to kind of get the teenagers into the Russian way of thinking, and how they try to brainwash their mentality and their identities. So according to Ukrainian journalists, I thought that it's interesting. In UNARMIA, participants are divided into two types. These are the children of officials who mostly attend certain competitions and participate in gatherings in Crimea, and just children of ordinary citizens. The latter undergo more intense military training and must pass very tough physical standards. If earlier children from the age of 14 were taken there, now with the consent of the parents, it is from the age of 8. So from the age of 8, you have to basically let your kid go to this whatever militarized organization and listen to everything they're telling there. Parents can, of course, write a statement saying they don't want their children to participate in any militarized formation. But then the occupying authorities, teachers, and school directors promise serious problems. And parents simply don't risk refusing to allow their children to participate in this formation, because they just might have even bigger problems. So for them, they will be super disloyal. So they don't want to show that they are disloyal, so they let their kids sometimes go there because, well, if you don't, then you might be perceived as disloyal. Former UNARMIA member, then an artilleryman in the Russian army. Unfortunately, this is Ilya Zazulsky, a former member of UNARMIA from occupied Crimea. According to the Ukrainian journalists, he joined the UNARMIA after Crimea was occupied in 2014, and then after the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion, he joined the Russian army. And I see that we have not so much time left, but I have around 10 more slides. We won't talk about that, but I just encourage you to read more. We Ukrainians have a lot of resistance movements. I write about them behind the lines. Ukraine warns Russia's neighbors to prepare for resistance. It's very interesting how before the full-scale invasion, 100,000 manuals were downloaded from the website of this Ukrainian Resistance Center, and where people were just explained simple things if they don't want to collaborate with occupying authorities, what they are able to do. It's not violent. It's basically some tips how could people survive, and that was super popular. Then we have violent resistance movements like Atesh, Mariupol resistance. I spoke with one of the agents of Atesh, and it's fascinating how they infiltrated the Russian army because they do want Ukraine to liberate the territory, and because they knew that it's going to happen, so they joined the Russian army in order to help the Ukrainians. If you want to read more, I left the link inside the resistance, sabotage and Putin's plans for Ukraine. And the last one, Angry Mavka. I thought that it's wonderful because this movement was born in Melitopol when it was occupied, basically in the kitchen. Women just gathered and they wanted to understand how they can help. And it's a non-violent resistant movement. It's in Russian. I don't want flowers. I want my Ukraine back. So they just wanted to show occupiers that they don't want these Russian soldiers be on this territory, and that they want Ukraine to be back. And that is why they hand different leaflets, posters everywhere. More about that you can read. Unfortunately, Ukrainians have many detained civilians. Those people are civilians, mayors, or journalists from temporarily occupied territories, and we don't know where they are right now. According to Ukrainian government, it's about 20,000 people, about 16,000 citizens who are illegally detained in the temporarily occupied territory or were sent to Russia. But unfortunately, in some cases, people are afraid to reach out to Ukrainian government and say that their relative is missing because they are afraid that they will be transmitting the information or allegedly like spies by Russians. This is absolutely horrible case. Please do read more about Victoria Roshina. She went to the temporarily occupied territory. It's a Ukrainian journalist. She went to occupied territories several times, and in summer 2023 she was captured by Russian forces. Her body, like no one, it's absolutely a horrible story, but she basically, by April 2024, Russia confirmed she was detained, though details were kept secret. It was later reported that she might be in a pre-detail detention center in Taganrog in Russia. So they moved her from temporarily occupied Ukrainian territory to Taganrog. And on October 10th, Ukrainian media reported Victoria's death, confirmed by Russia's Ministry of Defense in a letter to her father. Allegedly, she died in September 19th, but her body was not returned to Ukraine. And right now, today's news basically is that Ukrainians haven't received, her family hasn't received her body, and no one knows what happened with her. But this is one of her cellmates that told what happened with her during the detention. So to learn more, the behind the lines, I basically read 60 Telegram channels, Russian Telegram channels, so that you don't have to do it. And there are updates on everything that they are doing. But a very interesting story. We are gathering here to talk about the resilience of Ukrainians. Look, this is a picture that was made in Kharkiv. It's one of my friends. He has a coffee shop. He's a journalist, but after the full-scale invasion, he just opened the coffee shop. This is March the 1st this year, after 9 Russian drones attacked civilian areas in 3 central districts of Kharkiv. He said, we came there, unfortunately there are some bad words there, but we came there, and because we are unbreakable and all of that, communal workers already put the doors and windows, then they have the mark, we are working, the Ukrainian flag. And he said, because we are unbreakable and all that, but more importantly, no crazy old man is going to decide what we should do and how we should live. No one. I thought it's fascinating. And also this story is Kramatorsk. For the first time, I hear the constant explosions here. The front is getting closer, and this felt more strongly. In recent months, there have also been issues with water supply due to the shelling. At the same time, the city is alive. Banks, cafes, and pet stores are open. Supermarkets even have lobsters in stock. Children attend clubs in basements, like dance classes, for example. Loved ones hug and cry at the train station. So that's it. And this is March 5th, 2025. Kramatorsk is in Donetsk Oblast, and it's very close to the front line. I don't know how many people live there, but it shows that the resilience of people is just in the blood. They don't want to be occupied. Thank you so much for your attention. Questions?
All right, to get us started into the question period, Natalia Feduschak will get us started. Yeah. And Natalia, if you don't mind, just refresh the audience on your background.
Yeah, first of all, it's such an honor for me to be here and to have heard Elina's presentation. I am 62 years old. I spent over 20 years living in Ukraine, and I grew up with one generation of Ukrainians. And this generation of Ukrainians is the future. And this generation will ensure that Ukraine survives and succeeds. So, bravo. Thank you very
It's for
much.
all Ukrainians. It's for all Ukrainians. Sorry.
So my name is Natalia Feduschak. I'm Director of Communications for Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. We are a privately funded charitable organization in Canada. It was established in 2008 with the goal of creating a dialogue between Ukrainians and Jews. We have done a great deal since our founding. To find out more about us, I invite you to look at ukrainianjewishencounter.org. I am here not essentially in my capacity as a director as part of this organization, but as somebody who has worked and lived in Ukraine, was in parliament when Ukraine declared its independence. And hopefully, I want to give everybody enough time for questions. So in the next few minutes, perhaps we can help put what is happening on the occupied territories in a historical perspective. So I drafted a few questions for Elina, and the first one that I have is when we look at the map of Ukraine today, the regions that are most directly affected by the war are located in the east and the south. And these are areas that in the Western world, in the mind of Westerners, has traditionally been associated with Russia, Russian speaking. And I'm wondering if you could tell us shortly, just quickly, about the links of those regions in Russia.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Natalia, for the question. Well, it's basically when you have Russia as your neighbor, some of the eastern regions of Ukraine border Russia. This is how it is. We can't do anything with it. So when I studied in Kharkiv, for instance, I saw many cars with plates from Russia. For them, it was easier to come to Kharkiv to just do their shopping during the weekend, because this is how it was before the full-scale invasion. Because if you're neighbors, you kind of just come over, just like in the neighboring state, like here, right? Why not? But in many cases, like Kharkiv, I mean, it's very hard to say right now in numbers, because many people will accuse me, no, like Kharkiv is a very Ukrainian-speaking city. But like I speak both languages. I speak Russian and I speak Ukrainian. In my school in Crimea, I think Ukrainian was even stronger because we had a stronger teacher. So it's all about the teacher. It's not about where you live. It's just about the person who brings you this culture, this language. And I think my Ukrainian is stronger. During the television career on air, the interesting fact about me, I could be on air in Russian and in Ukrainian. But for me, I was always in Ukrainian, because if I would switch to Russian, even though I speak it, I would sound weirdly and awkwardly. So my mom would always tell me, please just switch to Ukrainian. You don't sound well. And I translate from Ukrainian words like кримінальне провадження. I don't even know how to translate it in Russian. But like for many regions, it was a neighbor. And then this neighbor came, invaded, and said, oh, you're Russian. But no, it's like the biggest mistake of Putin to think that if a person speaks Russian, then he or she is Russian. I think that was his biggest misperception. And no, many people on the front line right now speak Russian. It doesn't matter for them because they're Ukrainians. And this is simply what happens when you live in the 21st century. You are on your land, and then one day, one chunk of your territory is illegally annexed, and Russians say it's Crimea, it has been whatever, like Russian or whatever they said there, like it's ours right now. And then in 8 years, they invade you with missiles from all the sides, and you're sitting there and you're like, what's going on? Like, I speak both languages, but I'm Ukrainian, and I want to be in Ukraine, and I want to stay Ukrainian.
So Putin has, over the years, he had, one of the justifications that he has had for invading Ukraine is we have to protect the Russian language speakers who live in Ukraine. And yet, again, when we look at the map of Ukraine, the East and the West are the territories that have suffered the most in this war. If he generally cared about this question of protecting Russian language speakers, why would he have attacked that area, and why is he continuing to attack this area? I mean, what is the rationale?
It's a great question. If anyone knows the answer here, I would be very grateful, because Ukrainians are we understand Russia will always be there, it's the neighboring country, but we have to do everything what is dependent on us, on our future generation, that we are the country fortress, that regardless the attempts that they will be making, and probably they will be making it over and over again, we have to be secured, we have to be protected, we have to rely on our defense capabilities, and of course on European and American, because this is how it is. But we understand that they will always be there, and after Crimea, everyone would say this peninsula will be liberated by diplomatic means. In 8 years, it didn't happen. The situation became even worse. Ukraine was very far away from NATO. Ukraine was not able to join NATO in 2022. So I still don't understand the pretext of invasion. I mean, what you're reading there, it doesn't make any sense. But to me, it's like when you can't own something, you are so irritated and you are so furious that you just want to destroy it. So to me, this is what is happening, because Putin understands that he cannot own Ukraine, and Ukraine is not Russia. So that is why he's so pissed off that he invaded Ukraine, and he wants Ukraine to be so far away from Europe, because with the war, we all understand it takes many years to rebuild and recover. And, with our digital, sectors and everything, we were booming and we were going towards the European values, and we are Europe, And to me, sometimes I'm just trying to understand this mentality, but I can't. And I still don't have the answers why Russian-speaking, say, Donetsk or Lugansk regions, they use the scorched earth strategy there. Why is it that it's it's not possible? Like, they were cities and villages, but we don't see them anymore. So if Russian-speaking people live there, what did you do to them? Is it the protection, or is it just a scorched earth strategy because you understood that you can't have them because they are not Russians, because they are Ukrainians, even though they can speak Russian, but it doesn't matter.
When we look at the history of this region, I think an important event, if we look at Ukrainian history, was called the Holodomor, death through hunger. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what the Holodomor was, and what effect does it have on Ukraine today, and specifically on this region. I think it would give everybody a little bit of a context in terms of the history, so there's a greater understanding of the changes that took place in the 30s on these lands.
And Natalia, thank you so much for bringing up this question. And if you can help me with more information, basically it's in 1932-33, that was a man-made famine by the Stalin authoritarian regime to basically destroy the Ukrainians, because he would seize their wheat and all the food and would transmit to other territories of the Soviet Union. And in this case, millions of Ukrainians died. And in November, I think that was 91 years since Holodomor, since that happened. And look, Putin is doing it again in 91 years, but they are targeting the civilian infrastructure, ports in Odessa, which is we know that there are a lot of cargoes that go to all other countries in the world, because Ukraine has always had, it was considered like the southern regions was considered to be agricultural regions. So that is why, to the explanation, this is the wheat and the blue and the yellow colors. So it's the bread basket. Like Ukraine feeds like many countries in the world, and this is what he's doing right now, because he is targeting the civilian infrastructure, ports, storages in Odessa, and then what they're doing in temporarily occupied territories, they're looting the local farmers, and they take their whatever harvest they have, and they I'm not really sure, but I think that they buy it on very cheaper prices, and they send it somewhere else. So it's again, like we're seeing it like the repetition of the history, but like in a very terrible way in the 21st century.
And I think an important thing when we talk about the Holodomor to understand is when we look at the question of Ukrainian language, of Russian language, in the East, during the Holodomor, many ethnic Ukrainians starved to death. And those lands were settled then by ethnic Russians. And in a way, we see when we look at, people today, apartments being taken over by people who have been sent from Russia or have gone from Russia, we see a parallel today. And I think that, this is not the place to go into a big, history lesson, but I think it's something that's important to understand as well, that leads to the complexity of what is happening on these territories. I wanted to touch on the Crimea for a moment, because you were born there, you're from there, and I'm wondering if you could talk about maybe the relationship between the different ethnicities that live on the peninsula, perhaps what they were when you were growing up, and what is that relationship like today between different peoples?
Right. That's such a great question, Natalia. And I'm always thinking about that. My life and my destiny could have been absolutely different. But when I was 16, I was representing Ukraine. I was from Crimea. I was representing Ukraine here in the United States. And I think it formed my identity. So to me, there was no questions, because we had, like in my class, we used to have probably, we even didn't think about that. Like, where are you from? You're all Ukrainians, we didn't have it because we were the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, but in the Constitution of Ukraine, we had a special status, Sevastopol, all of that. Like, we didn't even think about that because we were Ukrainians. And to me right now, when people say, but like, you are Russian speaking or like whatever, and I'm like, what are you trying to accuse me of, right? Like, you have the language. I know both languages and I speak both, and like, our state language is Ukrainian, so that's it. But when we were growing up, there was no many tensions. It's just, I feel right now, looking back at it, probably not everyone was so fortunate. Not everyone had a very strong Ukrainian language teacher. Probably they were Russified a lot. They knew only Russian language. And I know some of my classmates, they were not really great in Ukrainian, so they didn't have an opportunity to enter the Ukrainian university. So apparently they went to study somewhere in Russia, because back in those days, like in journalism, we had a lot of people who wanted to go somewhere to Moscow and study there. But that was, like, for me, there was never a question, because I felt myself Ukrainian, and many of my friends felt themselves Ukrainian. But we also had Crimean Tatars, Armenians, Greek population, and like, it's a melting pot of different cultures living there. And like, to my generation, there were no questions, But unfortunately, for the next generation who are there right now, and they were occupied, annexed, Russified, they probably will have many questions who they are. But like, for our generation, we didn't, like, it was very clear. But I think I'm also biased because I had my experience when I was 16 years old. And I think that those teenagers, which I told you about, all these militarization programs, like, if we can bring them to European country or the United States, if there are like any types of programs for kids or teenagers from temporarily occupied territories, I think that will form their identities. They won't have any questions who they are, because if they see another world, they will understand that their world is not just this closed community where they are told what to do and how to think, because they will have the critical thinking and they will see the world. So I think that for many, like for my generation, it was not an issue, but I see how right now it's like vice versa, and I don't even know what like the next generation, how they will feel, especially if they don't speak Ukrainian. But for that, the Ukrainian government has a strategy of cognitive deoccupation of the peninsula, but it will take years.
You mentioned the Crimean Tatars.
Yeah.
Who are these? I don't know how many people here have heard of Crimean Tatars. Have you? No. Okay. The plight of the Crimean Tatars is often overlooked when we look at the war, when we look at Crimea. And I'm wondering if you could just say a few words about these people, because in the Ukrainian discourse, they are very important. And within the context of the war, they are very important as well.
Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing this question. Right now, I feel that we talk about Crimean Tatars even more, because when I was growing up there, it was probably not an issue because we were just like growing up all together. But we know that there were many repressions of Crimean Tatars, who are the indigenous people of Crimea. So they were 90% of the peninsula. Like they were, I think, when the peninsula was just like after Russia forcibly annexed the peninsula in 1793, they were like 90% of Crimean Tatars, and then they started repressing them. Then during the Stalin regime, we had 1944 deportations. So many Crimean Tatars were considered disloyal to the Russian authoritarian regime, and that is why they tried to suppress them. And they were there was this mass deportations. Around 200,000 people were sent to Uzbekistan and to other to Uzbekistan, and like basically many people speak Crimean Tatar, but they were not born in Crimea. Then they came back to Crimea, and then Russia annexed it again. So to them, I feel like we have to pay them for like several times of being repressed, suppressed there. So, and that is why I feel that right now Crimean Tatar is one of the disappearing languages in UNESCO. But I'm really happy that right now the current ambassador of Ukraine to Turkey is actually Crimean Tatar, and he was in the Russian captivity. And I think, like, I just wish him all the best, and I hope that, sometimes I'm thinking about that maybe Turkey can help us with the liberation of our Crimea, but of course it will also take years. But I feel that those people are indigenous people, and we have to take care of them, we have to respect, and we have to pay them a lot for everything that they have gone through in Crimea.
Yeah. So I think I would like to open it up for questions. For myself, I'd like to say, I think when we look again at this map, that these occupied territories are very rich in terms of culture and different ethnic groups. And so for you all, when you look at this situation, the war in Ukraine, please just realize it has so many different layers to it. And sometimes, we try to bring it down to too simple of a level. But the lives of millions of people are being affected. So please, Kevin, I think you will.
Yeah, before I come around with the microphone and we field our online questions, could we have a round of applause, please, for Natalia Feduschak and Elina Beketova.
Thank you.
So we have two phenomenal resources here on stage, and I assured them that our audience has good questions. As usual, I'll come around with the microphone. It will be on. Please speak directly into the microphone. And then Megan will bring online questions into the room. And I know we have our first question right here.
it helps to sit up front. Thank you so much, James. I have two questions. The first one was really a request because I'm a dumb, and speaking of accent, Southern American speaker, not when the second thing was when you were speaking about, I think, what I would call Tartars. Is that right? Is that who you're talking about? The
Crimean
indigenous
Tatars, yes.
Crimean Tatars.
the Crimeans. Okay, that answers that question. And the first thing is really a request. I don't have a visual map image when you're talking about how close Russia and Ukraine territory is and all of that. I don't have a picture in my mind of,
No, laser.
okay,
So if you can see like this red territory that is currently occupied, they border Russia. So on the other side,
It's probably with the here. Is this it?
oh,
right
okay.
here.
So yeah, this is Ukraine. Okay, and this is Russia. Yeah, Natalia is showing to you Russia right now. So this is the border with Russia. So we're neighbors, unfortunately, and sometimes you just which is interesting. In 1994, when I was 5, Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum, which was very important. Right now, we're talking about Ukraine being in the war and why it happens to us. We got rid of all our nuclear weapons in assurances, not guarantees, but assurances of the sovereignty and independent state. And we have other countries who signed it, which is UK, Russia, and the United States. And then we found ourselves in the position when this memorandum doesn't work, that was like assurances. And what right now Ukrainians, regardless of every situation that we're experiencing right now, we hope that Ukraine, Europe, and the United States will stay together because we need allies. And we hope that whatever the deal will be, we will have something about guarantees, not assurances, but guarantees. Because with the Budapest Memorandum, we used to have it, but it simply didn't work because then we were told that were not guarantees, that were assurances. So it's like if you're a lawyer or in legal issues, you will understand what's the difference. But Ukrainians got rid of all the weapons, and then we found ourselves in the situation when we are fighting for, the freedom of our country and for the security of all the European continent right now. And hopefully the European continent will support us and they will step up, because we heard after the Munich Security Conference that they have to pay more attention and to actually become very responsible and, step up with the defense production and their increase of their financing and of everything. We'll see how it will happen and how it will evolve. Every day Ukrainians just get up and see and read the news, what happened today, how safe they are. But yeah, Russians will always be in there, will always be there. It's just like the matter how we will deter them, what we will do in order to become a country that will protect itself, and what our allies are eager, willing to do in support of a free country, but also a security and peace on the European continent. I don't know if I answered the question.
All right. A question from our online audience. Is there a possibility that Ukraine will eventually transfer Crimea and the Donbas region to Russia and not join NATO in the goal of peace for the rest of the country and a chance to join the EU?
I don't know how to answer this question, but according to the President Zelensky, he said that with the current support that we have from our allies, Ukraine cannot liberate all the territories that are currently Russian-controlled, but we will be doing it whatever it will take us. Some will be liberated by diplomatic means and some by military means. So this is the current situation. And I think that all these territories are in the constitution of Ukraine, which means for that, we will have to change our constitution. It's a big deal, for Ukrainians, because we don't change our constitution unless we have to. And our recent, actually, changes in the constitution that we have the European Union and NATO aspirations, but that was like in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully we will be, sovereign, united country.
I think the most important thing is that Ukraine remain a sovereign country, irrespective of whatever borders we see today. It being a sovereign, independent state, and that nobody dictates to it the terms of who should be president, of what kind of country it should be, that we don't see the installation of a puppet regime.
Mhm.
I think right now, it's an important question, but right now the most pressing thing is that it survives as a state, as an independent state.
If I may chime in very quickly, my personal opinion, I think it will be considered as a weakness. If Ukraine shows that whatever these territories are not controlled, we are getting rid of them, it will be perceived as a weakness. And this is a precedent in the current, international law, that a bigger country invaded the other country. And then after whatever years, they were like, okay, just we'll give it to you. I think it simply doesn't work like this, because then the whole international law and order is under the risk. We all understand it is under the risk, but right now we still have the hope that we kind of can fight, and then the justice will be brought back.
Thank you very much for coming, and I ask this question with great respect for Ukraine and its people. In fact, I have a Ukrainian flag flying and attached to my house across from the hospital. My question is, why does Trump sympathize and support Putin?
Natalia, you can start with it, and I will,
as a U.S. citizen, thank you for the question. I think that there are many opinions on this today. And if I could suggest some people to read, Ann Applebaum, Timothy Snyder, I think that you'll start to get a greater understanding for why. Look, I have my own personal political opinions that this is not necessarily the forum to voice them. But I think the important thing to understand is that Ukraine is part of a larger geopolitical strategy. And I have often said that it is the keystone. Every building has a keystone. And if you pull that keystone out, the building begins to collapse. Now, it's up to other people to see if they believe that it's the keystone or not. I happen to believe that it's the keystone. And if Ukraine should, God forbid, fall as a country or become a puppet state of somebody else, there will be many domino effects. We can lay out some of them, but I think 5 years down the line, 2 years down the line, it will not be a pretty picture for anybody. But a lot has been written about that question.
If I may quickly reply, that General Kalek, the envoy, the special representative of the United States, the envoy for Ukraine, he basically said, what you're seeing now and what you're witnessing are urgent efforts by the Trump administration to bring both sides to the table in order to get to a peace settlement. I just hope that the peace settlement that will be signed will be in favor of Ukraine, which was invaded by Russia. Because right now, I feel that sometimes it's blurred, because we all understand it happened because Russian Federation invaded Ukraine, a sovereign country. And I hope that it will remain as it. I don't want to be a country like a victim, because Ukrainians are not victims. And we're seeing that they're fighting like lions and everything. But I just hope that like there will be this understanding that Ukraine is in the bigger country, in the bigger picture, than other authoritarian states will be observing the outcome in Ukraine, and that they can invade other countries just because they want to, just because they think it's a great idea and they can do it, and they don't feel any punishment for that. So if there is no punishment for that, then we will be living in a very dangerous world. And I hope that we won't, and I hope that the peace settlement, even though the current administration want to have a fast, quick peace settlement, that it won't be basically Ukraine will give all the territories. I hope that it will have the Ukraine's interest inside of that. Yeah.
From our online audience, as Crimea is a much larger seaport city than Kiev, how critical will be the loss to Ukraine if Crimea stays with Russia?
Well, currently, because Ukraine doesn't control Crimea, and after the full-scale invasion, it was very hard because we thought that we would regain control diplomatically, and then this territory was used basically as a military base. From Crimea, they, basically launch rockets on the mainland of Ukraine. So that is why I'm explaining that all territory of Ukraine should be under Ukrainian sovereign control, because then it won't be happening. Because if it is under control of Russia, then we don't know what will happen afterwards. Like, what if this territory will be used for the further advancement somewhere into other whatever countries in Europe, just because they can do it? So that's the question to think. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you comment briefly on Moldova and Romania, what the stability of their governments are and their alignment?
Well, I wouldn't probably talk about that because they have their own problems, and I just feel that we have to be together because this is the territory that is important to us, and Romanians are biggest allies to Ukraine, and they're working hard with Ukrainians, Americans. But to me, if you're talking about their situation, Natalia probably wants to add, no?
In terms of Moldova, there was an excellent piece by Peter Pomorantsev recently in The Guardian. And he talks about how disinformation has worked, how Russian propaganda has worked, how essentially people have been bought off, but they have pulled off something really amazing in the sense that they are moving towards Europe. But that piece, it was several days ago. I mean, it was just excellent. It's one of the longest pieces, sort of in-depth pieces about Moldova that I've read in a long time. And I think when you look at these countries, you have to understand, and I don't think that people understand the depth of the Russian propaganda machine. And this is not something new. This has been going on for over a century. The Russians have used literature, culture, history in terms of promoting their own propaganda. In Moscow today, if you go to the Kremlin and you look at the exhibitions that are there, half of them are from Kiev and Rus. Because they came, they took the expositions, and everything got shipped off to Moscow. I studied in Moscow in 1989-90, so I saw, everything that was happening there at the time. And, it's really amazing when now, 30 plus years later, where you see how this machine works. Mm-hmm. And so you have this also that is happening, within European countries, in those that have been in the former Soviet satellites. I hope that answers a little bit your question.
Thank you very much. There is a giant room of big-hearted people here. We've sent a lot of coats and things to Ukraine. But now, now that our government has basically turned its back on the Ukrainian people, what is the most direct and efficient way to support your country towards victory?
I'm so grateful for this question and that you're formulating it this way. I, I just I just can't stop thanking you all for being here with us today and for all your support. And I know that many people here support an organization or someone in Ukraine. But I believe in like people-to-people connections and communications. I have a couple of non-governmental, non-profitable organizations working in Ukraine that you can support, and you probably heard of Razom, United Help Ukraine, Ukraine-US partnership. Then there are like many organizations, but like if you know someone directly in Ukraine, I can give you the context of like very small organizations who are helping, for instance, internally displaced people in Ukraine. And they are giving you what they spend their money on afterwards. So it's like basically people-to-people connections. If you can do it, it will be very helpful. And I know that many people, even though they are terrified to sometimes read the news, they understand that American people are supporting them and supporting us, and they understand it's just like turbulent times. You know, we would like to read about those times, but we have to live in them. You know, so okay, we'll handle them. So meaning that if you can support like particular people or organization, that will be very helpful.
Well,
you can do it directly, as far as I know.
Well,
There is a national bank account. You can do it.
But you have United 24, which is President Zelensky's fund, where they have fundraisers for drones, for ambulances, for. I'm not ready to say that this administration has given up on Ukraine, because I think even today there was a lot of news that came out of Ukraine. Apparently Secretary Rubio has, they have flown to Saudi Arabia
for next week. They are gonna meet with the Zelensky team. So it's
I think I think despite your question, I think that I don't think we're quite there yet, because yes, Ukraine needs U.S. support. But I think it's also really important to call the White House, call the State Department, call your local representatives. And in the state of Colorado, there are not many people to yell at, right, in this state. I mean, they've been really pretty good as to Ukraine. But I think that that pressure has to be consistent. And again, the understanding that this is part of a larger geopolitical situation.
I'm sure there's curiosity in the room. We will send out a follow-up email with some of these book recommendations, journalist recommendations, organization recommendations. Yeah, Elina.
James, can I please ask one question? Because Natalia has absolutely amazing list of books. I really want Natalia to share with us, because I will write down some of them.
You know what? I will, because I think there's a gentleman here who has a question.
But Natalia, you
in the
should
back.
Share with us.
I'm sorry, sir. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask? Yeah. What I will do is there's a list of reading material that I will pass on, and that you can just some of my suggestions to understand Ukraine and the situation more. But I think since somebody. Yes, because I saw your hand was up.
Yeah. But so we have a new guy in Washington, and I have a lot of questions, but just this one is, he's trying to cast doubt on the support of the Ukrainian people for President Zelensky. Can you comment on whether he's supported by the Ukrainian people, and how the Ukrainian people feel about him and potentially his future as the president of Ukraine?
About whom?
Zelensky, his future.
Well, yeah, there was the latest poll that showed 57% of support to Zelensky. And if the elections happened in February, we had like 3 people, and there was Zaluzhny, the former commander-in-chief of Ukraine, and then there were Budanov. There was Budanov, who is the head of the defense intelligence, but they had less ratings, meaning that sometimes what we hear, allegedly the next person will be more loyal to Russia, but I don't think so.
No.
I think people living in Ukraine right now and going through every attack, they believe and trust the armed forces of Ukraine who are defending and protecting them. So that is why the trust to the armed forces is very high, and the trust to all the commanders is very high. So like, I don't know what would happen if the elections were held, but Zelensky has 57% of the support.
If I could just add to this, is that this, first of all, this is a country at war. The Constitution does not allow for an election during the war. I mean, it is not easy, based on just what we heard today, to hold a free and fair election. It will not happen. Ukrainians do not want an election. When the day comes for an election, I personally believe that President Zelensky will have support. My sister-in-law lives in Ukraine, and we were talking about this, and she says, well, why do people think that he would not win another election? So if we look at the leaders of Russia and the leaders of Ukraine, since 1991, you will see pretty much one face in Russia, with Medvedev playing, a pseudo-presidential role for a few years. Mm-hmm. And then when you look at the faces of the Ukrainian presidents, there have been 5.
6 different presidents. Yeah.
And the reality is that Ukrainians get impatient. They like to change their leaders because they believe in freedom and in democracy. And they are fighting like hell today to be able to keep that freedom and to keep that democracy. And it is a country that has had problems, has problems today, and will continue to have problems. But when the time comes for an election, and if President Zelensky decides to run, we will see what the outcome will be. I personally feel that people will be surprised because Ukrainians like to change their leadership. They do not want to live under a dictatorship.
We lived through that, yeah.
Hi there. So I have a question. Within the last 6 hours, the White House has threatened to revoke 250,000 legal status Ukrainian citizens in the United States. What impact does that threat have if it isn't instituted? And what impact did it have, and what's the choice if it is invoked?
Well, hopefully it won't happen, because according to the White House press secretary, she said that there is no decision yet, and she said that the news that appeared, it was not true. So, but hopefully 240,000 Ukrainians who fled Ukraine, and they are on the humanitarian parole, they did it because they lost their homes, or they felt insecure or under the threat on the territory of Ukraine. So I don't believe that it might happen, and hopefully the current administration will take into account the current situation in Ukraine. But as far as I know, this decision hasn't been taken, and I hope that it won't be taken.
We have one more question over here.
Thank you. A little bit of a leading question and a follow-up to Ukraine having 5 presidents. There's a narrative out there around corruption in Ukraine.
6 presidents, actually.
6. Thank you.
6.
There's a narrative
6,
around
yes.
corruption in Ukraine, and yet we know the Ukrainian people have risen up twice since independence and overthrown their own governments. Natalia, you were teaching at the University of Kiev. By the way, that's my sister. Um, so the Ukrainians themselves have overthrown two of their governments that were puppets of the Russian regime. I'd love to just hear the two of you comment on that and help dispel this narrative of corruption in the country.
I think our country has changed a lot. To me, it's very difficult to talk about some of the presidents because I simply didn't care about them. I was a small kid, and then I remembered we lived through revolutions, and whenever Ukrainians don't like something, we always have a right to say and to express our opinions. That is why I think that right now, like elections, or it's not the problem at all, because when the right time will come and the martial law won't work, and we will have a peaceful time, Ukrainians will go to the stations and vote whoever they think is a good president for them. I have trust in Ukrainians. In terms of corruption scandals, unfortunately, we have gone through a lot during the last 5-6 years because we have the anti-corruption court, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, the specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office, and they have facts because they return money to the budget of Ukraine. And to me, this is the biggest. That is why they exist, because they bring money that were stolen or something. So to me, it shows it's the indications of their work. But I think that the issue of corruption, if you look at any other European country, you will see corruption there. It's just Ukraine is on the spotlight every time, and every time there is a corruption. And I think that right now in the war-torn country, it's a crime and it has to be prosecuted in any case. But right now it's just like a sin, you can't do it because the country is in the war and you are stealing money or whatever. It's just horrifying. But because we're just on the spotlight. But I think that Ukraine has done a lot of homework, which was proven by the our standards to the European Union, because if we didn't do our homework, we wouldn't be where we are right now. But we did a lot of work. There were many pages, and we did it, which says that Ukraine is on the path.
Yeah, I would just say that there's, based on everything that I've seen, there's very little patience for it. And I mean, it exists in every society. And people need to, this is the one thing always, Ukraine, corruption. Look at New York City.
And on that happy note, would you please join me in thanking Elina Beketova, Natalia Feduschak,